It's good to see you all here today. I've got a question for you. Have you ever wondered why we as kids idolize our parents? It's an interesting thought. I was thinking about that this week. Why do kids idolize their parents? Growing up, we see our parents as superhuman. They can't do anything wrong. They are perfect with neither fault nor failure. They are powerful. The reason that we do that is actually quite sweet when I went digging. The reason children idolize their parents is because when we are kids, our parents are the lens in which we understand the world, right? So for us, our parents are the first people we see do anything. We observe the way they interact with other people. We notice the way they hold themselves, their mannerisms, and the way they approach things like their career and their job. For us, our parents are the first social connection we ever experience. And so it's quite sweet when you think about that, because naturally, since our parents are our window to the world, everything they do has to be right. They can't do anything wrong. They must be some sort of superhuman. And so we as kids look to imitate them. We imitate their actions. We repeat their words. We try to walk in their shoes, literally and figuratively. Some of you may remember my first sermon here and where I wore no-show socks. That's where it started. We as people tend to imitate what we admire. It's part of who we are, part of us as human beings. We imitate our parents growing up, and as we get older, we find some new people to look up to, and we imitate them. And maybe as we get a little bit more older, we start to admire our parents a little bit more and go back to trying to imitate them. But it's who we are. It's who we were meant to be. We as humans, it is ingrained into us to image. And that is true when you read Genesis chapter 1 and you read the story of humanity. We as people were created to image not only the people around us, but to image the one who created us. And so it's here that I want to begin in Genesis chapter 1, because Genesis chapter 1 builds the foundation for what we see as not only the purpose of humanity, but its mission, its vision. And there's a lot of background that I want to talk about today here in Genesis chapter 1. So let us read. Genesis chapter 1 verses 26 to 28 says this. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." So this is how the story of humanity begins. We are created in the image of God. You see, Darren preached a sermon on this earlier last year, and what this text is pivotal to is important to our understanding of humanity. For us as Christians, every single person has built into them this value by virtue of us being created in the image of God. It's a concept that establishes not only our value, but our purpose. No matter where we come from or who we're born to, every single one of us, by virtue of being human, has value. Because we all have the image of God. But as I said, it doesn't just establish value. It also establishes purpose. And to understand that, we need to look deeper into some of the backgrounds. You see, the Hebrew word used for image in this text is this word, and I've spelt it wrong here. It's the word selem. So not seret, selem. It's this word selem, and the word selem is correctly translated as image, but it comes from the root word for shadow. So it's quite intelligent what they do here, because if you think about a shadow, if I see your shadow isn't you, right? Your shadow isn't you, but your shadow points to you. If I see Jethro's shadow, for example, my immediate assumption is that Jethro is going to be somewhere close to where his shadow is. Jethro isn't his shadow, but his shadow points to it. And so when you move through the translations and get to this word selem, you actually see that what it's speaking about is that it's this lesser reality. The shadow that points to the human, this lesser reality that points to an ultimate reality. That's what it means to be the image of God. But there's something quite interesting about the word selem, because it isn't only used to define those made in the image of God. The word selem in the Hebrew Bible is also used to describe images or idols that people would, in biblical times, would worship. You know, in Deuteronomy chapter 12 and Numbers 33 especially, when the word image or idol is used, it is this word, selem. Idols that God commanded no one to possess or worship. Isn't that interesting? When I discovered this, I felt quite uncomfortable about it, because you've got this double meaning where, look, we are made in the image of God. We are this selem, this lesser reality that points to a greater reality, but so are these statues and idols that people would worship. The same statues and idols that God told them never to have and never to make. That same word is used. So why this double meaning? Well, to understand the full extent of what the word is trying to communicate, we need to understand why it was used. You see, the concept of the image of God wasn't something that was new when Genesis chapter 1 was written. This wasn't a new concept or idea. And the reality was, if you lived in ancient times and you lived under any king or any pharaoh, these kings would call themselves gods. These kings would elevate themselves to the same level as the gods that they worshipped, so that when they ruled the people, you weren't just doing what the king said, you were following the rule and the authority of a god. And so if you were an Israelite and you were a slave in Egypt, chances are you would walk past something like this. This is a statue of Ramesses II, and he's the pharaoh. He's the one that they believe was the pharaoh when the Exodus happened. And what Ramesses did while he was a pharaoh was he would put these statues of himself all over the empire, and people would call these statues images of God. These statues were the images of what was supposed to be a self-claimed greater reality, the Pharaoh acting as a deity. And so throughout the kingdom, these statues wouldn't just serve a political purpose, but they had religious significance. Because every time, day in, day out, when you walk past these statues, you weren't just walking past a king, you were walking past an image of God. Day in and day out. So when Genesis steps in the scene, it's not introducing a new idea, What Genesis does is it repurposes what people already believe the image of God is. You see, Genesis 1 is communicating to the people of its time that the image of God isn't the identity of a single person on their own. The image of God isn't this statue of Pharaoh that you walk past every day. It doesn't belong to this king who exercises his authority over you. Yes, you walk past the image of God every day, but it is in the people that you see walking around you. The image of God is you, and it's me. You see, for the people of the ancient world, this idea would have been revolutionary. The very fact that we as humans can be elevated on the same level as these kings who rule us, as images of God. This would have been incredible to those who first heard this concept. Because not only does it elevate the value of every human being, but it embeds with us a purpose that only comes by virtue of being created in God's image. And that is to rule and subdue. You see, when Genesis continues talking about us as humans, and when it talks about our purpose, it uses royal language to describe what we were meant to do. We were meant to rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and the animals in the ground. We were meant to subdue that which we worked on. We were meant to fill the earth. This is royal language. And it's able to happen because Genesis 1 says you were made in the image of God. Isn't that incredible? You know, Genesis 1 so intentionally speaks to the value of all human beings. We are all created in the image of God. And when that is your starting point, you tend to see the world a little differently. You tend to approach people a little differently because in our conversations, in our interactions with people, there is inbuilt into every single person, Christian or not, the identity of the Creator. It adds something more to our lived reality in this world. And you see, this reality isn't just relevant to the Old Testament, because when sin enters the world, you know, a lot happens that undermines this image of God. But when Jesus steps on the scene, and when he speaks about image, he doesn't throw it away as something that isn't important anymore. Instead, he repurposes it again to call us to something greater. So I invite you all to open to Matthew chapter 22 now, because what Jesus is about to do here as he talks about image is very important to the way we need to approach our relationship with God. And we're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 to 17. Some of you might have heard this story, and it's an interesting one. It says this: "Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. 'Teacher,' they said, 'we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?'" So here we arrive at the New Testament. And Jesus is in a little bit of a predicament here. Jesus is approached by the Pharisees and the Herodians. And if there's anything you need to know about these two groups of people, is that these groups of people never agreed on anything. They were always in disagreement with each other. They always were arguing with each other. You see, the Pharisees were very traditional and set in their ways. They believed that, you had to follow the law in order for you to be saved and for the Messiah to come and for all these things to happen. But most importantly, the Pharisees opposed the rule of the Romans because they saw it as a violation of God's rule over Israel. Anyone who was supportive of the Roman rule was seen as an absolute traitor to Israel. Then you get the Herodians, who were on the side of the Romans. See, they were concerned with maintaining the status quo as it was under Roman rule, and they were particularly keen with maintaining the rule of King Herod. And so oftentimes they would clash with the Pharisees, right, who saw them as traitors. But here's the thing. If there was anyone on this earth who could unite these two groups, they would have to be pretty special, right? You know, I'm sure there's many comparisons I could draw from the political state of the world today. But the reality is, genuinely, if anyone were to unite these two groups, they would have to be the most incredible person on the earth. And you know what? Jesus does just that. The Pharisees and the Herodians hate Jesus so much that they put aside all their beef, they put aside all their issues with each other in order to dismantle and bring down Jesus. And the way they do it is brilliant. You know, they ask Jesus the question, is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Now, this is a genius question because there's only two answers to this. If Jesus answers yes to this question, then he couldn't be the Messiah because he submitted to Rome. And so the Pharisees are happy. But if Jesus answers no, then he could be accused of inciting rebellion against Rome, giving the Herodians reason to have him arrested. What a brilliant trap. It's actually quite smart, and it's okay to appreciate how smart these guys are because, you know, how would you get out of this situation? It's brilliant, but Jesus' answer completely dismantles them. Let's read from verse 18. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." And they brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then he said to them, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. How good is this? Jesus perfectly avoids the trap that they have set. It's incredible. You see, when the Pharisees tell Jesus when the Pharisees and the Herodians begin to lay the trap, what does Jesus do? All right? Because as I said, his answer could land him in a whole lot of trouble no matter what he says. But what does Jesus do? Jesus asks them to bring a denarius. He asks them to bring a denarius, and he asks them the question, whose image is on this? Now, if I brought you this coin, and I came up to you, and I asked, whose face is on this coin? If you were a historian of some sort, you would say, "Oh, Rahel, that is Tiberius Caesar." And I would say, "Wow, you are very smart. That is correct." If I brought to you a 50-cent coin, and I gave it to you and I said, "Whose face is on this?" Depending on what year it was made, you would say either Queen Elizabeth or King Charles. But here's the thing. Does Jesus ask the Pharisees and the Herodians whose face is on this coin? No. What does he ask them? Whose image is this? Whose image is this? You see, let's get back into languages. The Greek word for image used in this text is the word eikon. It's where we get the word icon from. And the important thing about this word that Jesus uses here is that it is the same word you will find in the Greek Old Testament in Genesis chapter 1 when it says we were made in the image of God. Same exact word. So this word eikon isn't just a random word that Matthew is throwing in his gospel. It isn't a word that's, just thrown in because of what it means. It intentionally points us back to Genesis chapter 1. And as you start thinking and as you journey through this, you understand and you start realizing that maybe we're not meant to pay attention to the question that Jesus asked, but maybe we're made to pay a little more attention to the question that he doesn't ask. Because here's the thing, if Jesus concludes that that which bears the image of Caesar must be returned to Caesar, then the question we are left asking is what bears the image of God? What bears the image of God? And when you have the background that Genesis 1 provides you, you realize that this text isn't talking about finances. This text isn't just talking about taxes or tithe. It is talking to something greater, something larger. Christ's call in this text is far more challenging than any of us ever think it is. Because if that which bears the image of Caesar must be returned to Caesar, then we, as bearers of the image of God, must return our whole lives to Him. Isn't that incredible? Jesus doesn't just dismantle his opponents. Jesus doesn't just slyly navigate around the subject. He is calling all hearers of this message into something deeper. Jesus' call is one that is greater than anything we could have ever imagined. We are called not just to release our finances, not just to release our job or our church lives, but our whole lives must be given to God. Why? Because we bear His image. You see, the fact that we are made in the image of God doesn't just give us innate value. It doesn't only give us purpose, it gives us a mission. A mission to live our lives in total surrender to our Heavenly Father. When Christ uses the word image, He's not thinking about your job. He's not thinking just about your money. He's thinking about you. Everything that you are, day in, day out. Everyone that you walk past as the image of God. Jesus thinks of them when He says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. Our mission is to then live our lives in total surrender to our Heavenly Father. You know, it's natural for us to image our parents. It's natural for us to image the icons that we see on the screen and on the movie and in the movie theaters. It is natural to image the people we look up to here. But the ultimate goal is to image Him who created you in His image. Today, you're going to have the chance to respond to that. Because thousands of years ago, Jesus came down as the ultimate image of God. He who was perfect, He who lived a sinless life, He who gave up His life, He who was God Himself, made flesh, came down to earth and provided us with an example. An example that we're going to have the chance to follow through to today. Right now, we're going to have the chance to wash people's feet. And if you are willing and if you are able, I invite you to make your way down the hall after this to wash people's feet. But as you do so, and as you partner up with someone, if you're comfortable, I want you to ponder on this thought. And it's the thought that by engaging in the very act that Jesus engaged in, you are fulfilling part of your role as the image of God. This isn't just a tradition that we do once every quarter and, we want to get along with. This isn't just something that, we try to avoid and we don't really want to do. This is something that we are called to do by Jesus himself.